So today we want to look at ICT strategy. I hope you can all see the screen.
Yes, we can see.
Okay. So today we want to look at ICT strategy, strategic planning, and hopefully after this we shall be able to do our first assignment, then also our second, following after is our second. We have looked at organizational strategies, the generic organizational strategies. Now, the objective at the end of this particular session is for us to be able to differentiate between the two, the overall organizational strategy and ICT strategy itself. We should be able to understand clearly the benefits of ICT planning. And hopefully at the end of this, the role of the CIO will have come out much more clearly, because this is a role of the CIO. The CIO stops looking at himself or herself as purely a techie person, but somebody who is going to align ICT along the strategic objectives of the organization, and to look at ICT as a strategic enabler to help achieve those strategic objectives. We shall look at the classic approach to ICT strategy development. So this will be our guide. There are others which are developed. You can also take time and look for those methods, but we shall look at the classic approach. We also want to look at the implementation phase, and also want to look at the things that influence ICT. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay, sorry, the system had just warned me that that there was something wrong with my speakers. But let's move on. So what is ICT strategy? Yeah, just like the organizational strategy, these are actionable interventions, just like organizational strategy. There are things that we can do, interventions we can make to add value. Yeah, there are interventions that, things that are actionable. So they are not, it's not something abstract. This is something that is doable, that essentially adds value to an organization's strategic objectives. That is one. Two, it must be cost effective. As much as we want to add value, we also want to be, it has to be cost effective. ICT tends to be very expensive. That is one of its biggest drawbacks, and one of the reasons why management normally pulls away from ICT. So we must always think in terms of cost effectiveness. So where we can bring about a reduction in cost, not just in ICT itself, but also in achieving a strategic objective. That is where the selling point of ICT strategy comes in. So it is there. These are something actionable. Two, it's a set of decisions. They are very, very intentional, specific decisions that ICT, together with senior management, make together. Intentional decisions, intentional actions, that things that are intended to, but basically that's what management is. It's about making decisions and following through those decisions. It also highlights with ICT strategic management, you know, most of the time when I ask most of you what you're doing, you can see there isn't much of a relationship between ICT and the business. There isn't much of a relationship. And in anything, if we must see mutual benefits, there must be a relationship. ICT strategic planning actually highlights this relationship, that you're making intentional technology choices in relation to the business in which you exist. Intentional technology choices in relation to the business in which you exist. Then strategic planning, just like the organizational planning, produces a living document, a document which has a start time and an end time. That's what something living means, that it has a birth and a death time, or a time when it is phased out. So it's a living document that is updated regularly, that is evaluated over time. So it's very much what we've been discussing. What are the benefits? One is aligning technology to business goals. That relationship we were talking about earlier. It's aligning technology to the business goals. So that's the beginning of creating a relationship between ICT and the business. You're making actual technology choices that are in relation to the organizational goals. It enables ICT systems to be fully integrated. That we are no longer seeing ICT as the people who provide the laptops to somebody, to different key people. You have an accounting system somewhere. You have internet, and that's where things stop. But you have integrated systems that are supporting business processes. So in all of this, you're building a strong relationship between the business and the ICT department. So the ICT department stops being some tiny little thing there that is seated in one corner and is called upon when a printer is down. No, but you have a strong relationship that has been built. The final thing is the role of the CIO. You have an elevated role of the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, or sometimes the Chief Technology Officer. That elevated role is brought out. So who is the chief, the CIO? There's an article I think I put up on Moodle. You can take time and look at it. It highlights this particular role. But you can read through the slides. I will not, let me not take it, so we can have this as a separate discussion. So what is the classic approach to developing ICT strategy? Yeah? What is the classic approach to developing ICT strategy? We have, we follow very much the same role, the same approach that we followed with overall ICT, overall strategic development. You have overall organizational goals that have been developed for a certain period of time. Remember, it's a living document. You identify business capabilities that need to be supported. So ICT begins by identifying what are those business capabilities that need to be developed over the next 3 to 5 years. What are those objectives? Remember the long-term objectives that the organization needs to focus on. Then you assess the gap between the organization's current maturity and where it wants to go. You also, at this time, now when you assess that, you also then identify the technology gaps that exist, where the organization is now as far as technology, and in achieving those goals. Where is that gap? Maybe it could be in terms of internet capacity, technologies that are currently being used by the organization and what is currently available, technologies that are needed and where the growth needs to be. So you begin to design, to identify those gaps. Now, once you've identified those gaps, you design a technology architecture that will support the required business capability. The technology architecture that will need to support the business to achieve those 5-year plans. Then you come back and draw the gap where you lack as ICT, and these become your actionable points that you need to achieve within the next 3 to 5 years to help the organization get where it is supposed to be. Finally, you develop a prioritized roadmap to build that targeted. So that is where the gaps come in. The prioritized roadmap, where you say, for us to be able to get that targeted technology architecture, we need to first start with maybe 1, backbone, 2, this, like that. We prioritize and drive towards those goals. Here we have a framework, a kind of framework, which helps ICT or the ICT departments to develop an ICT strategy, or that architecture that we were talking about, the targeted architecture. So it looks at 5 pillars, based on which, once you focus on each pillar, you will have your overall technology architecture, based on which your ICT strategy can be based. It looks at applications, all the applications that are necessary that are needed. Integration, that means where systems need to be integrated, where departments need to integrate. The infrastructure, services available, and the sourcing, that means where you need to outsource any kind of services. So the application strategy, you look at all applications that are needed to support the business now and for the goals that have been identified. What are all the applications that are necessary? Integration strategy looks at, like we said, where the business processes need to integrate to support one another. So the infrastructure looks at where you need to make investments to support integration and all the applications that you've identified. Then the services are basically who ICT is going to serve, who are the customers that ICT is going to serve, plus also services that you may outsource ultimately. So the services that ICT is going to serve within the organization, who are going to be your customers, the different departments that are involved, then there are those outside of the organization, service providers and so on and so forth, and even other customers that may exist outside. So that is where you look. ICT looks at what kind of services need to be offered to others. So, for example, the UMU ICT department would know who their customers are. Right now, it is both staff and students. Before, the portfolio was much smaller. The service portfolio was much before COVID-19, but now I imagine it has expanded. Yeah, it has really expanded. So that would be that type of architecture. Then sourcing, of course, looks at where you look at a third party, where you need to, what kind of services will you need to go outside for, and where they may be in-house. So here we have, again, another framework which guides you on the strategic planning process. And it specifically looking at ICT. So, of course, we start with the overall organizational strategy, the business strategy itself. It is our first input, yeah? The input for the IT strategic plan. So you start, there needs to exist, the organizational strategy needs to exist, because it is the first input, because it's the one which tells ICT what needs to be done. It tells ICT where growth needs to be for the ICT department. So it is that input, because it gives us the understanding of the business issues, where the business needs to grow. Now, once you understand, then you begin to align. Yeah, the ICT department begins to align based on what we discussed earlier, where you put up a scenario saying the business needs to be at this point in 5 years' time. Okay, where are the gaps? Where are the current gaps? Where can ICT make an impact to come in to get from point A to point B? So here you begin to draw scenarios where ICT can make an impact for that business to get from point A to point B. Then you determine the implementation strategy, so that the implementation strategy, basically, this is when you would have, you begin to draw up your architecture for the infrastructure, applications, processes, so on and so forth. So here, once you've set up your architecture, then you know the areas which need to be, the prioritized areas, the areas to begin to build that architecture to the futuristic ICT that we want to attain. You define your IT strategic initiatives. So here, after you have identified your priority areas and where you need to identify the areas where you need to start. So this is where you begin to build your initiatives, that the initial things that need to be started, the prioritized areas. So this comes, of course, with budgets. What will it cost? The resources, the time, and so on and so forth. Then you also establish review periods because once you've prioritized and then you begin implementation, then you begin to identify the times when you're going to review to see whether have you achieved the first one. What if the first prioritized area, what was its success level, and what was its impact, and so on and so forth. So before I go any further, do we have any question?
No question, Doctor. We can proceed.
Okay. So what is ICT strategic implementation? It is basically what you've selected as your strategies. You begin to implement your strategic objectives as ICT. You begin to implement. So one key point is, as you're developing your ICT strategy, make sure that you're doing this together with management, because management is the first obstacle to fail, the first thing that will fail ICT strategic development or strategic implementation. It must be done together with management. Management must not see these strategic choices as a threat. They must not see them as a threat. That is why developing them together is extremely, extremely important. I remember one time when I was head ICT UMU, I was part of, there were these retreats we would have with Renu. So I remember I was talking to one head ICT of one university, and he was telling me how he had an ICT policy and blah, 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 but nobody knew. And I was thinking, so what was the purpose of that policy? And you developed it single-handedly. So what was the purpose? So this thing is a public document. The strategy and policies are public documents. Yeah. Actually, sometimes many times you find organizations put up their ICT strategies and policies, even organizational ones. They put them up on the website for all to know, so they are public. The first people who should know is management and all other members. Why? Because they should be of benefit. They shouldn't be a threat. Yeah, it should not be a threat. Then the implementation itself is continuous, so it involves constant engagement with stakeholders. So to implement ICT strategy, one needs to develop an organizational team. So that team that is going to help implement the ICT strategy. So this team should involve all stakeholders. I think I've given you the story. I told you the story of e-learning at UMU. One of the key reasons why it gained a certain level of success, and even now I actually, every time we go for meetings, board meetings, there are some lecturers, some staff members who are extremely frustrated that some staff members completely embraced online and they have refused to go physical, like myself, and things like that. And what's one of the reasons for that is academic staff took this on, became their mantle. It became academic. It was not an ICT initiative, it was an academic staff initiative. This was truly a project for academic staff. It is not ICT that teaches. It is academic staff that teach. So the people who should be, who should bear this flag are the academic staff. So likewise, ICT systems are used by people. They are users. They are the people, those who use what we refer to in ICT as users. It is the different departments, the accounts department, marketing and sales and operations and so on and so forth. It's not ICT. So that organizational team should include all the stakeholders who actually will benefit from the system. Yeah. Resources should be made available. Resources should be made abundantly available to ensure that this strategy is implemented. Now, for those resources to be made available, the benefits of why this strategy, why this policy is being implemented should be clear. The benefits to it, that we are achieving organizational objectives. Yeah. And creating encouraging policies. Yeah, creating encouraging policies. These are things like, for example, rewarding those who demonstrate benefits. Yeah, rewarding those who embrace, recognizing those who embrace these changes, and so on and so forth. Employ best policies and programs for constant improvement. Linking accomplishment to results, link reward structure, make use of strategic leadership. This is again using key people, key stakeholders to drive the implementation team. This slide just looks at some of the factors that will influence ICT strategy. We have the internal and the external. The internal are one, the business goals. This is our first input. The business goals are extremely important. It doesn't make sense for ICT to go and copy and paste what has been done elsewhere. Your organizational business goals should be your first input. It should be the major influence for your ICT strategy. Two, the finances that you have available. This is extremely important. Do not create over-ambitious ICT strategies. Do not create over-ambitious ICT strategies. I remember again in one of those meetings we would have with Reno, there was a gentleman who came from, Reno supports research and educational institutions. So research institutions even includes some of these, like for example, infectious diseases is part and parcel of RENU. So these ones are donor funded. There was a gentleman from one of these heavily funded organizations, and he always wanted to point out the extraordinarily ICT resources that he had at his beck and call. You know, something like, oh, may I have a $1 million server, simulation system at my, something like that. And you're talking to institutions that are barely even keeping up with monthly payments. So one of the key things we need to note as ICT is that the financial profile of your organization. Keep a big note of that. The size, structure, and type of organization that you have. So here, these internal factors require the ICT department to look outside of ICT to really understand who the organization is. It is sort of like saying, if I'm going to buy a dress for myself, let me first know my character as a person. Let me also know my body type and things like that. Like, for example, as a woman, even as a man, you can think in terms of that. So it also looks, you look at, you first look at internally yourself. Legacy systems, it's basically looking at what systems are predominantly used by your organization. There are those which internally, which are very dear to the organization maybe, and then there are those which are common to your organization. You look at those systems. Then you look at your information assets over time. Yeah, that your information profile. What does it look like now? What will it look like in 5 years' time? The external factors is basically looking at who are your customers? Where are they? Looking outwardly, geographically, are they dispersed? Who does your organization communicate with? Technology changes that are currently happening, new things that are coming up, who your competitors are, the compliances that you need to deal with, and legislation. What are the laws that are governing ICT use, both within your nation, within the country, and also internationally? Yeah. So these other slides are basically looking at all these things in detail. Business goals, we have discussed this. We've discussed this in detail, and I don't think we need to go at it even further. But again, look at your business goal. What is your business? What is the organizational business goal? And then from there, build based on that. Here we have an example that if your business goal is to increase the volume of data on your employees or or your customers or things like that, then you may want to think of things like, okay, should we have online forms on our website for our customers? If you want to reduce the amount of time employees are doing ABCD, can we do something like that? I remember just the key point, I had gone to Centenary Bank just last week, and we were filling out forms, for our local factory here. And we filled out so many forms, and then I said, you know what, this could have, if they had an online form, we could have just filled out this information at once, and then just came in and append our signatures, that's it. But we wasted a lot of time just seated there, filling out forms. So that was something I think the ICT department could have looked at. Finances, of course, again, we look at the cost and benefits. We look at our financial profile. And we also look at the strategic objectives we want to come up with. Are they going to reduce on costs or increase on costs? Is there a one-time cost benefit? Where will that money come from? And so on and so forth. Looking at the internal size, you're looking internal again, looking at creating a structure, a profile of your organization. You look at each department. What is its size? What are its processes? And so on and so forth. Would it be better to outsource than have something in-house? The hierarchy of the organizational structure, the hierarchical structure. What are the procedures that people go through as they carry out business processes? So to have a clear understanding of that. Looking at legacy systems, where if there are systems that need to be replaced, old systems, new systems, and so on and so forth. Look at some of those things. Now, as we discuss these things, I would also like you to take note. Look at the case study that I gave you. Some of these questions are extremely important. Some of these things we're discussing are extremely important for you, the assignment that I will put up for you. So look at some of these questions, and they are going to guide you for your assignment. So looking at the information assets. So here we are looking at, you're looking at basically all information systems that exist, both paper-based and digital. You look at what data you're keeping and in what format. And then how is it going to be translated to decision-making? How does that become important? How is it accessed? Who accesses it? And so on and so forth. So the external factors, you're looking at who you're communicating with externally. Their geographical locations. Do you require a LAN? Do you require a WAN? And so on and so forth. Is e-commerce of any significance to you? Is there any international legislation that may affect your communication? Yeah, is there any external communication? For example, when UMU decided to use Google Apps for education, there was a big question that came up that Google decided to take all its servers to the US because that was a new legislation that was put up. And there was a legislation also, I think, in the US that they monitor electronic communication. Of course, this is in relation to terrorism and so on and so forth. So that was the reason for putting servers, Google servers, back into the US. So, of course, there was a question of how does that affect us as an institution that is using Google Apps for education? So we weighed the pros and cons, and we said, no, the benefits far much outweigh the issue of your emails being monitored. That was according to us as UMU. So these are just some things that you consider. Technology changes. You look at, of course, the current hardware that you have and the hardware that will be there in the next 5 years' time, and where you need upgrades. So this is also where you also have a policy that guides upgrades, system upgrades, new hardware upgrades, and so on and so forth. When you look at external competitors, you want to gain a competitive edge. That's the most important thing. The most important thing we want to look at is we want to gain a competitive edge. When you're picking up technology, why would a customer choose you over another? Yeah, why would a customer choose you over the other? Is it that you can quickly give access to services online and so on and so forth? So you want to gain a competitive edge. Who are your customers? Are these people who are prefer online services? Are they of a certain age bracket? Those are things that you want to look at. Compliance with external organizations, especially if you need to communicate with other organizations that the systems that we're using are compatible with those systems that are for an external organization. So ICT needs to be aware of those seamless communication. Legislation, you need to look at legislation, what new laws have come up. ICT needs to be aware of those. Why? Because ICT needs to make sure that there's protection of users and data. Yeah. So those laws ICT needs to be aware of. Yes, here is just a question about the CIO, that what is the rule to ensure that the policies written support legislation. So you can also think in terms of that, of your own organization. Do we have any questions so far? If no, then I guess let's move on. Now, we have the issue of corporate ICT strategy. Some of you are in large organizations, really large organizations. Others are looking at ICT in terms of government. There's one student of mine who was looking at enforcement of national ICT policy. You realize that it influences a number of government agencies. So there's looking at ICT in terms of a large organization. Now, sometimes you find these large organizations have more than one strategy. Yeah. Sometimes some individual departments have their own strategies separate from the overall organizational strategy. So in developing a corporate ICT strategy, one looks at some of the technology life cycle, procurement, so on and so forth. Let's look at these individually. So when you look at the technology life cycle, you're looking at the hardware. It may not be a good idea to buy the latest hardware, which is expensive. All technology has a life cycle. There's a time when they come out, they become obsolete. So it is important that ICT is aware of these factors. 2, be aware of the prices that keep rising and falling. It is not a good idea to go for the most expensive technology. Over time, these technologies, the prices go down. So you don't necessarily want to go for the most expensive. Sometimes gaining the latest technology may give you advantage over a competitor. So the pros and cons must be considered. So consider your competitive advantage, consider the life cycle of the technology. In other situations, it may be cheaper to lease. It may be cheaper to lease. Then also consider the frequency of procurement. How many times you may need to procure. So at every turning point, ICT must also consider that you want to keep your technology costs down. Why? Because ultimately you want to save on, you want to cause a cost differentiation for your organization. You want to gain a competitive advantage, yes, but you also don't want to become the most expensive item on the company budget. Future-proofing. So this still goes hand in hand with the previous point when we consider the life cycle, the type of technology we want to purchase. You want a technology that is not going to be absolute within 3 years, yet you have a 5-year working plan. So you need to consider the life. It is about looking at a technology that is going to carry you for a certain specific period of time without going back to finance to ask for more money. Consider, you consider things like the future network traffic. Are we going to increase in network traffic or reduce in network traffic? And do we need to increase our bandwidth capabilities or reduce? Are we going to have more people working at home or more people working at the geographic, the physical location? Consider flexibility of the number of workstations. Maybe would it be better to work with laptops? There are offices now which consider more freedom than the rigid setting where you have a workstation positioned somewhere with a network cable. Others would prefer something more that is wireless, more free thinking. Different offices have different corporate offices have different setups. I understand Google has a very free-flowing office space. Procurement is a key point in ICT. I remember, I think this was one department that I heavily dealt with when I was head ICT UMU. Yeah. This is one place, this is one department that is heavily integrated with ICT. So you also have to consider you have to consider sales agreements, you have to consider relationships with people, those who you purchase equipment from, the total cost of ownership, and so on and so forth. So many times the procurement department already has its own policies, its own strategy and policy. So it is good that ICT harmonizes the ICT strategy together with procurement, and especially when it's a large organization where ICT can easily get lost. So when you're developing that corporate ICT strategy, make sure that you are in alignment with the procurement department. People consideration. Now, this is extremely important. Yeah. When ICT strategy is coming up, normally sometimes it can be a threat. Why? Because sometimes ICT tends to reduce, in quotes, our need for people. It can reduce our need for people. So it is very important that technology doesn't come in to necessarily wipe away HR, human resource. That is one. We don't want to be seen as that people. But although in certain cases it becomes necessary if you want to reduce on costs. Two, you affect also recruitment policies. Why? Your qualifications now matter. If we're going to now become more ICT dependent, your qualifications matter. Your ability to be technology savvy, whether you are a strong marketeer or not, your technology savvy is extremely important. Nowadays, we are seeing new jobs coming up, people who are specifically focused on social media content development. So you see now qualifications are changing. Yeah. So we need to be sensitive about some of these things. Two, also the issue of the data we collect and who accesses certain information. Now that we are becoming more and reliant on ICT. So this is where also policies come in, policies that are coming in to protect some of these things. Standards are extremely important. Now that we are talking about policies, it is important to have standards for ICT. ICT must have certain standards set up to ensure that you have a seamless network and also continuity, or rather technology life cycle. I think NITA-U has a set of standards on on ICT that it must use for any government agency. So this also, within yourselves as CIO, you must have standards and protocols where you say, as ICT, these are the standards that we must use. For example, for network cabling and so on and so forth. Those are things that are extremely important to ensure that you have continuity. So here is just a question that you can read just for further discussion. Do we have any question? I think that spells the end of the lecture for today, but you can have a look at this article, which basically looks at standards, especially in healthcare. Do we have any questions so far?
Doctor?
Yes, please.
Yes, it's just a comment.
Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you very much for the lecture.
Yes,
I
please.
have never participated in such an activity, though I've seen documents being developed. So that's why we have been a bit quiet, I think. We are trying to digest the information.
Okay. It is okay. Let me give you time, and I'll open up a forum discussion just to have further discussion. But I think for today, I think that's what I wanted to give you for today, so that we focus on doing something practical after all these lectures that we've had, to start on an assignment. I don't know if you've all accessed the case study and you've taken time to read through. Have you looked at the case study that's on Moodle?
Not yet.
Okay, please do. It's already there on Moodle. I put it up already.
Yes, we saw it.
Yeah, the Clarion School for Boys. Please have a look at it.
Yes.
By the end of today, I will have put up your assignment for you to be done as a group.
Okay, Doctor. I also wanted to inquire about next week.
Yes, please.
Are we continuing with the normal lectures? Because it seems it's the end of the semester.
It would be good if we at least we finish. Why don't we finish next week? Because we don't have much left.
Okay.
The content isn't much.
The good thing it's take home.
Yes,
So we
yes.
can do it like research the way we did it.
Yes, please.
Okay, that's good.
Okay. Okay, then. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor.